Hi, in this video we're going to take a look at a different way of talking about past habits. In the previous two videos we've looked at used to for talking about things that were true in the past but are not true now. And one thing that I want you to remember about used to is that when you're talking about past habits, it's always correct. Okay, so if you're not sure about what I'm going to teach you today, you can always use used to, that is fine. So you might be asking, well, if it's always correct, why are we going to learn another way of saying it? This is really important when developing your natural English and developing your grammar. Remember when I talked about the past simple, when we talked about narrative tenses in a previous module, and I said that just using past simple all the time is really boring. Well, if you're talking about your past and you just use used to, it's going to get very boring very quickly. So the other way that we can talk about past habits is by using the word would. Now there are three big differences between used to and would. First of all, the type of verb. Used to can be used with action verbs. So for example, I used to play football. And it can be used with state verbs. For example, I used to be a policeman, for example. So all types of verbs are possible with used to. However, with would, action verbs are fine, but you cannot use state verbs. So for example, you might say, when I was a child, I would often go to the park with my grandmother. That's fine, that's an action verb, go. But you cannot say, when I was a child, I would be happy when we did that. Because be is a state verb. So that's your first big difference. The second difference is a time phrase. In used to, the time phrase is not necessary. You can simply say, I used to live in Spain. You do not have to say when. I used to work in a shop. It doesn't matter when, it's not important, because used to talks about the past. However, would can be used to talk about many different things. And therefore, when we use would to talk about a past habit, we need a time phrase. So, for example, it would be something like, when I was a child, I would go to the park with my grandmother. You can simply say, I used to go to the park with my grandmother. If you want to add the time phrase, when I was a child, I used to go to the park with my grandmother, that's fine, but it's not necessary. You don't have to use a time phrase. But over here, if you say, I would go to the park with my grandmother, it's difficult for the listener to understand that you're talking about the past, because would is used for many different things. Finally, and this is probably the most important one, it's about emotion. Used to is related to facts. There is no emotion when you use used to. You can put emotion if you want, but it's usually something like, I used to work in a shop. No emotion. Yeah, you're not happy about this, you're not sad about this, you're just stating a fact. But with would, you've got a good or happy emotion, or perhaps a bad or unhappy emotion. So for example, if I say, when I was a child, I would go to the park with my grandmother, that's a happy memory. And by using would, I am putting a little bit of emotion in there. If I say I used to go, it's just I'm telling you a fact or a story. Perhaps a bad memory, it might be if I made a mistake, my boss would often shout at me. Okay, when I worked in the shop. So when I worked in the shop, if I made a mistake, my boss would shout at me. Bad emotion, unhappy. If I say used to, it's just, I don't care. When I worked in the shop, if I made a mistake, my boss used to shout at me. So when you're writing stories about your past, then would is a really nice phrase to put in there because it gives that extra level of emotion. If you are, for example, in a job interview and they say, please talk about your experience, then used to would be much more suitable. That's it for this module. I hope you'll join me in the next one, and I will see you very, very soon.